Welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a tier list of video game consoles. Now, I haven't played every single one of these, and I'm sure you're looking at the list here of the pictures, and there's a lot you probably don't even recognize. You know, there's some stuff like this. What is this? Why is this here? Some stuff I'm probably not going to rank. Maybe put it under no opinion, but I'm going to do my best to rank these consoles in a way of which... Gosh, how should I rank these? I think it has to come down to game library, right? Because, like, how else could you rate a console? Like, on its hardware? That feels weird. Like, yeah, the DS is kind of interesting, like, hardware-wise, but, like, the GameCube compared to the PS Vita compared to the Wii, it's like, how do you compare those hardware-wise? It has to be about the games. So, that's what we're going to talk about. All right. This is in a weird order, is it? Looks like it's alphabetical. So, it's kind of weird, but we'll go with it. 3DS. How do I feel about the 3DS? Oh man, I was just talking about the hardware. How I don't want to talk about the hardware for these, but the hardware does play a factor into why I'm not a huge fan of the 3DS. I feel like it has some great games. There's a lot of like cool remakes. Like, gosh, what is it? There's the Dragon Quest remakes. Snake Eater? I don't even... Is that Metal Gear Solid 3? Is that a good remake? It's weird that it was made in the first place, I guess. But yeah, like, I like the 3DS on paper. But just holding the 3DS... I don't like holding a DS in general, let alone a 3DS. I kind of want to put it in B. Yeah, that feels right to me. It does feel a little weird to like I feel like it has a good software library. But I don't like playing it. I have a 3DS, but I just don't use it. And it's solely because of just how you hold it. It's just like a flat brick you hold. There's no like ergonomics to it. Yeah, B feels fine. Maybe it'll stay towards the top of B. I guess we'll see. What is that, a Sega Master System? I have no experience with the Sega Master System. Or the Atari 2600. Like, I guess that comes to the problem with, like, if I had an Atari 2600, I wouldn't want to play that. I don't like the super old games. Like, I like Super Nintendo, I like some Nintendo games, but earlier than that, I really don't like messing with. Should I rank the Atari 2600 lower? Because I'm not a huge fan of, you know, those super archaic type games. You know, I'm just not going to rank the Atari 2600. I think I don't have a lot of personal experience with it, and it's so old. Like, I don't know how I would compare it to a 3DS. Like, it feels like they're in different ballparks of, like, ranking them. Oh gosh, there's a lot of... What is that? That's a 5200. That's a ColecoVision Intellivision? Oh boy, my old video game console knowledge is starting to fail me. I think I got those right, though. Commodore 64. I have no experience with super old PC hardware. Put that there. Dreamcast. Getting back into the things I know about. I didn't have a Dreamcast when I was younger. So, what do I know that was on the Dreamcast? Sonic Adventure. What's that? Shenmue. Space Channel 5. Seaman. You know, I'm gonna put... I think this is gonna show that this is like truly my personal list. But there's no Dreamcast games that makes me want to feel like it's a need to get. Like, the Sonic games are cool and all, but yeah, I don't know. DS Lite. Is there an original DS here? Or is this the only Nintendo DS we're gonna see? Okay, it looks like this is the only DS, so I guess this DS Lite represents the original DS. The original DS had some bangers. How do I compare it against the 3DS? Hardware wasn't as good, so games were a bit more weird. Like, I'm thinking back to Metroid Prime Hunters. Gosh, that was like a launch thing, wasn't it? Close to launch. At least the demo was. I remember getting the, I got Super Mario 64 DS alongside a Metroid Prime Hunters demo with my original DS way back in the day. I don't know. You know what? I'm going to put it above the 3DS, and I'm going to lower the Dreamcast. Yeah. Game Gear. I'm not a huge fan of older games, like super old games, as I've said, and, you know, portable kind of makes the games even more archaic in a way, that they're running on super low-end hardware. We'll put in no opinion, I guess. I don't know many games ported all other than like the Sonic the Hedgehog games. Game Boy. Gosh, I guess to kind of contrast what I just said about the Game Gear, about how some of the games, you know, super old hardware doesn't really hold up. I feel like a lot of older Game Boy games kind of do hold up. Oh man, I might be kind of merging the Game Boy and Game Boy Color in my head. I never really had a distinction between Game Boy and Game Boy Color in my mind throughout the years. Gosh, how do those compare? I feel like I'll leave the Game Boy right here. We'll get to the Game Boy Color. GameCube. This was my console as a kid. We'll just put it here for now. This was my childhood. So obviously that's going to bias me in a certain way. You know what? That'll be our first A tier. There's a lot of good games for the GameCube, but I feel like there's some consoles that are just a step above. And we will definitely get to those. The GameCube's something special to me. I feel like there was a lot of games I played when I was a kid, and a lot of games I wish I could have played. And just, I don't know. Probably a nostalgia thing, but who cares? It's my list. Game Boy Color. I think I'm going to put Game Boy Color above Game Boy. Because there's a lot more games on the Game Boy Color, I think, that I prefer over the original. You know, despite how iconic the original Game Boy is with Tetris and all that. So this one had like a second-gen Pokemon games, had the Dragon Quest remakes. It's about my only experience with the Game Boy Color, but I guess it had Wario Land. Yeah, what was that? Super Mario. Was Super Mario Land 3? I don't know if that was a Game Boy Color game or an original. I think it was a Game Boy Color. Yeah, I'm content putting Game Boy Color above the Game Boy. Game Boy Advance. Oh my gosh, that's got to be like high A tier. Game Boy Advance had some amazing games. Gosh, of course the Pokemon games, you know, it had a bunch of RPGs, had Fire Emblem. It had Mother 3. I feel like it's a great platform, but the only thing holding it back was kind of the, wasn't the sound hardware for this kind of bad? I remember hearing people, I'm not too knowledgeable when it comes to hardware or like sound stuff. But now that once I started reading about it and, oh gosh, what was it? I was comparing the versions of Final Fantasy VI on the Game Boy Advance to the Super Nintendo version. And apparently, like that's something I noticed, the sound difference in the music from Final Fantasy VI on the GBA versus the Super Nintendo. So yeah, you know, despite the sound problems with the console, I will put it way up there. Above the GameCube, yeah. Game Boy, what's that doing there? I don't know, yeah, what was that called? The SP. That didn't have any, like, does that go in its own tier? I guess I'll just leave it down here. Didn't have any extra games or anything like that, so we'll leave it there. Was that the Jaguar? No opinion. The Lynx? No opinion. I don't know what that is. No opinion. Odyssey? No opinion. Is that the Master System? Is that the Master System? Oh, wait, is there some, like, I guess I'll put this in no opinion, too. I think there might be some, Master System versus Mega Drive thing. Because, yeah, there's two Genesises here. You know, either way for the, Master System. What was this in? Is that an Atari console? Whatever. Master System, I have no opinion. I guess I don't even know what that console is. Genesis / Mega Drive. Guess I'll use the picture of the Genesis since that's what I know. I don't have a lot. I don't have like a. I don't have a lot of nostalgia for the Genesis. Like that's Sega games weren't something I played growing up. Just thinking back on the games that existed, there aren't a lot that I'm really excited to play. Like whenever those collections come out of like 50 Genesis games, there's not a lot of stuff I'm interested in. Like what Genesis games have I played other than Sonic? Everybody's played Sonic. What is there? There was that one platformer that was on both the Genesis and Super Nintendo. What was it, like a Rocket Knight? I forget what it's called exactly. But it was kind of two different games, but they were sort of the same on the two consoles. I don't know. I think I played the Genesis version of that over the Super Nintendo one. Yeah, I don't... Sorry, Sega, but... You know, I'll put it above the Dreamcast, actually. I guess I just don't have that much of a nostalgic hook to Sega games. Like, I like a lot of Sega games these days. Like Yakuza, obviously Sonic. Some of their strategy games they do on PC is kind of cool. I just don't have that nostalgic hook, you know? And that's kind of what this tier list is about. Nintendo 64. I might ruffle some feathers here, but I'm not a fan of the Nintendo 64. It's kind of a... I'll definitely talk about this later on, but I don't like consoles that haven't aged very well. When I'm doing this list, that's something I'm really concerned about, is like, would I want to play this game in the current day? Is this console something I would like to own and be playing, you know, on my TV? And for the Nintendo 64, there aren't a lot of games that are like that. You know, there were so many growing pains throughout the Nintendo 64 with like camera controls, graphics. It's like trying to get to grips with like a 3D system that made a lot of those games just not interesting to me. So yeah, I don't like... Super Mario 64 is cool. Mario Kart's cool, I guess. I don't like Mario Party. Yeah, I like long RPGs, you know, that's why I put the Game Boy so high. GameCube kind of high, while I put some of these other games kind of high. But super long games, Nintendo 64 didn't really have. And I guess that's kind of because of like the storage system. You know, not to skip ahead too much, but the PlayStation, you know, the PlayStation compared to the Nintendo 64, it had discs, so you could store a lot more content on a disc compared to a cartridge, which only had so much storage space. So when it comes to like bang for your buck, Nintendo 64 never really stood out to me like that. But, you know, it's not quite D tier. I don't really want to put it there. I haven't used D tier yet. Is there any D tier games in this that I'd put? No, there's none that I'm really... Like the Atari 50... Like, I haven't played the Atari 5200. I watched the Angry Video Game Nerd episode on it, like, a decade or two ago. But, like, should I even offer my opinion on it? I don't know. If I were, it's D tier, but I haven't played anything of it, so I'll just leave it there. What is that? Is that the Saturn? Gosh, I don't know my Sega systems at all. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. That joystick kind of looks familiar. Is that the Neo Geo Pocket Color? I don't know anything about that. You know what? I'll put the N-Gage as the first D tier. What is that? Oh my gosh. I thought I knew my video game consoles, but I don't know any of these. Okay, PlayStation. Oh boy, we're getting into the heavy hitters now. The PlayStation. Gosh, I mean... You know, where else could it be? The original PlayStation is just so iconic. Like, what... Gosh, it feels like there's so many great games for the system, but how many can I even name? There's all the Final Fantasy games, Metal Gear Solid, Chrono Cross, Tekken. Like, there's some of these, like the GameCube, I feel like I I should like, but the PlayStation just feels right to me. And that's not even something I grew up with. Crash Team Racing. That's like the one PlayStation game I played a lot. I didn't have a PlayStation. I went over to my cousin's house and they had a PlayStation. They had Crash Team Racing. Oh my god, and Crash Bandicoot. But Crash Team Racing specifically, that was one I did play as a kid and I loved that. Like, that's great. Crash Bandicoot's great. Yeah. PlayStation 1 is S tier. No doubt. Oh boy. And how does the PlayStation 2 compare? Obviously, it's an S tier. No question about it. But is it better than the PlayStation 1? That's a tough question, man. They both had such iconic libraries. They both had crazy RPGs, you know, fighting games, adventure games. Katamari, that's a weird PlayStation 2 game. You know what? I feel like PlayStation 2 has to be above PlayStation 1. Yeah, we'll leave it like that. PlayStation 3. PlayStation 3. Is that another S tier? Let's think about this first. I'll put it in B tier. PlayStation 3 was cool. Had a lot of great exclusives like Last of Us, Uncharted. I did get it sort of late into its life, and I didn't really mess around with the, gosh, what is there? There was Killzone. That was a big thing. I didn't play any of that. There were a lot of remasters for the PlayStation 3. There was like Shadow of the Colossus, PlayStation 2 game, Ratchet and Clank, PlayStation 2 game, Jak and Daxter. There were a lot of like re-releases for the PlayStation 3 that kind of made me really appreciate having a PlayStation 3 at the time. But it feels weird to rank the PlayStation 3 higher just because it had games from the PlayStation 2 on it. It's at least A tier. It's at least above the GameCube. I think the performance of the PlayStation 3 did hold it back in some parts. Especially for like multi-platform games like Skyrim that had like some serious problems. Fallout, I guess any Bethesda game had some serious problems on a PS3 versus 360. Yeah. PlayStation 4. Oh gosh, we're getting modern. It's weird going through. Like, I'm going to go through all the PlayStation, then I'm going to have to go through all the Xbox. But PlayStation 4. I'm going to put that in B tier. I don't know where, though. I'm going to put it between the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. I liked having a PlayStation 4, but it wasn't compatible with the PlayStation 3. So every game on it was like... It's not like it had backwards compatibility to rely upon to make it more of a meaningful console. So gosh. You know, I think that's right. Like when I think of good PlayStation 4 games, the first that comes to mind is Spider-Man. And even then, it's an okay game. It's alright. I guess The Last of Us Part 2, haven't played that yet. Yeah, I don't know. Kind of iffy on that, but yeah, we'll leave it there. There's probably a lot of stuff I'm just probably missing on that makes it. You know, comparing it against the Game Boy, the DS, the GameCube, it's hard to do. So there's fine. PlayStation 5. In terms of exclusives, I have a PlayStation 5. I got it relatively early on in the when all that scalping stuff was going on. I don't think I've bought a single PlayStation 5 exclusive. Is that representative of the console itself, or is it just of my interests? It's weird because the line between previous consoles has been blurred with a lot of multi-platform stuff going on, where it's like, this game's on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. So in previous generations where, you know, a developer would have had to choose, you know, do we make this a PlayStation 4 game or a PlayStation 3 game, or is it like kind of a multi-platform thing? Where they did some of that with like Call of Duty games. I remember that specifically on Microsoft platforms, but I feel like these days exclusives are different, especially with like cross-generation games. Like what is there? Spider-Man Miles Morales, that was on PlayStation 4. Horizon Forbidden West, that was on PlayStation 4 as well as 5. So if those games had been PlayStation 5 exclusive, I probably would have viewed this console higher. But because they were developed for the PlayStation 4 and were playable on that hardware, it's like not as valuable in my mind. Plus, we're early on into the generation. It's hard to, make sense of that stuff. And as well, I guess games are a lot less platform locked these days. There's a lot of games that are just multi-platform. Gosh, I was gonna give the Fallout as an example, but will the next Fallout game come out on PlayStation with Microsoft having bought it? I don't know. So maybe we're gonna go back to that time where games were exclusive to one console, and we'll see that a lot more. Less, Call of Duties and Fortnites, and more consoles buying up individual developers so they get their games for their platform and they can't put it out on Xbox or whatever. But maybe we won't see that if the Activision Microsoft merger goes through. Kind of hope it doesn't, because more exclusives would be bad for the industry, but you know what? I'll put the... I feel like I gotta put it below the PlayStation 4. We haven't seen all of the PlayStation 5 has to offer. I think just by numbers, the PlayStation 4 had more interesting games. Alright, I'm back. I took a water break. What was I talking about? PlayStation 5. Yeah, we'll just have to see how that turns out after the console generation ends. If I were making this in 4 years, maybe my opinion would be different, but for now, we'll leave where it is. PSP. Gosh, I forgot I actually had one of these. Yeah, the PlayStation Portable, man. I think that was the first console I actually soft modded. So I was able to install themes I wasn't supposed to on it. It was a whole project for me. But I didn't play it a lot, honestly. And God, I hated UMDs. Hated those stupid little disc things. They always got scratched up. Maybe I was just bad about taking care of my consoles back then. I think that was definitely the case. It was cool you could play PlayStation 1 games on this. That was actually really cool. Having all the iconic, Final Fantasy VII, all of that on portable. That's pretty cool. But the exclusives, I did not care about at all. I'm gonna put that in C tier. I'm fine putting that down here. PS Vita. Gosh, that's another difficult one. I got one of these before. I don't even know what they're like nowadays, but I got one really cheap at GameStop. I think it was less than $100 maybe. And I did not play it at all. I think the only time I've played it, the only game I've completed on my PlayStation Vita was the PSP version of Final Fantasy 1 and 2. Yeah, I think the PlayStation Vita had its fair share of games. It was a very good visual novel machine. And for what it's worth, that's a cool thing to have. Have a little portable device you can take with you anywhere. And you can play Steins Gate on it, or was Danganronpa on there? I don't know. Whatever. Play all your little visual novels on it. And it's cool that that's a thing. But, with the other certain platform, that's kind of not really needed these days. You don't need just a visual novel dedication machine that only plays those. And, it played other games, of course, but, that was eventually the niche it found, was JRPGs and visual novels. They tried making games what was that Uncharted game? There were probably some other, first-party games that Sony tried to make it more interesting, but eventually it just found its niche for Japanese games that... Persona 4 Golden. That was the reason to get a PS Vita for so long. That was why I got a PS Vita, I'm pretty sure. So I could play Persona 4 Golden. Because people thought it was never going to come anywhere else. And then it eventually came to PC. And then I think it's on other platforms now, but... that was the reason to get a PS Vita. PS Vita ranks pretty low to me. That might be the first D tier. Can I do that in good faith? No, I can't put the PS Vita in the same tier as the N-Gage. I can't do that. Yeah, I'll put it here next to the PSP. You know what? No, it's worse than the PSP. Yeah. It's cool that it had PSP emulation, but the games for the PS Vita itself, I wasn't too interested in. Oh gosh, that's the Sega Saturn, isn't it? What was that other thing? What's this? Oh, is that like another European versus... Actually, I don't know. I don't know what that is. Super Nintendo. Super Famicom. S tier, of course. But where in S tier? Super Nintendo has some of the best games of all time. Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Super Mario World, Super Metroid. So many great games. You know, with just those 4, however many I mentioned, I feel like it has to be top of S. You know, PlayStation 2 is great. PlayStation 1's great. But Super Nintendo, that's just on another level. Mega Man X. Contra 3. God, there's just so much. You know, there's so many, and I'm struggling to come to name some of them, but it's just because there's so many great games. I think it beats out all those. Nintendo Switch. You know, this is a console where I have to talk about the hardware. And I feel like... Wait a minute. Are we missing a Nintendo Entertainment System? That's the last Nintendo console. Wii U, Wii. Are one of these a Nintendo? I don't think any of these are Nintendo Entertainment System. Well, I gotta rate one of these as a Nintendo first. We'll get to the Switch in a second. So let's imagine that... Oh god, which of these looks like a Nintendo? This kind of does. What is that, the ColecoVision? We'll rate the ColecoVision as if it were... Hold on, can I add... I don't know how this site works. Hold on, give me a second. I don't know how to use this site, and I don't want to click away or it'll remove all my stuff, but... What was I ranking? The ColecoVision. I'll just rank this as the Nintendo Entertainment System for now. There were a lot of great games for it. You know, Mega Man, Castlevania, Mario 3. All kinds of crazy stuff for it. Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest. But... Man, I've said it once or twice, but the Nintendo's just on the cusp of being a little too archaic for my modern sensibilities. You know, games that don't support saving, that really sucks. Like Metroid, you can't save. In the American version, at least. That's a big knock against the console for me. That some of the games, they were trying to figure out what a video game should be. You know, there was the Atari 2600 and things before the Nintendo. But the Nintendo Entertainment System is where video games started to become have more modern sensibilities, and it kind of made it difficult to deal with sometimes. I'll put it here. There were some... I think overall I'd rather play the Nintendo than the Game Boy. Yeah. Nintendo Switch, okay. So I was talking about this before. I feel like I have to talk about the hardware here. Because in previous generations with, I guess not to get too ahead of myself, but with the Wii U, you know, the Wii U was a home console. It was something you have plugged into your TV and you play when you're at home. And if you're on the go, you know, you got your 3DS. You can play Pokemon on that whenever you go somewhere. But you can't play that Pokemon game on your TV. You know, you can't play Ultra Sun on your TV. And it really sucked, at least for me, that there was this, like, dichotomy, this separation of games where there were portable Nintendo games and there were home console Nintendo games. And it felt weird to me that, you know, that dichotomy had to exist. Like, why can't Pokemon Ultra Sun be a console game? Why can't it be on the Wii U? And of course it makes sense in the context of, you know, wanting to focus on one platform. And, you know, if they develop it for the 3DS and there's all kinds of systems that make sense for the 3DS, what does that mean if you put it onto the Wii U? But I just, you know, I said earlier when I was talking about the DSs, I just hated holding a DS. I don't like holding a Game Boy. I don't like handheld consoles in general. You know, PS Vita, PSP. I like controllers where they're ergonomic. And not a lot of handheld consoles are. So that's why I was so glad when they announced the Switch. It felt like they were bridging the gap between, you know, they always, for the longest time, they've had handheld consoles and home consoles, and never would they intersect. But the Switch, it's the merging of these two things that, like, nobody thought could exist. Like, would anyone have ever expected to be able to play a mainline Pokemon game on their TV? Like, maybe it would have happened, sure, but did you think Nintendo would ever let you? Like, I would have liked to, but I don't know if I would have expected Nintendo to do that. And the Switch was a big innovation. You know, we'll definitely talk some more about innovation later, but the Switch, man. God, that's got to be an A tier at least. Does it deserve to be an S tier? There were some great Switch games. You know, Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild 2, that's coming out. You know, I've had my fair share of problems with the Switch in terms of performance and graphics. You know, we'll drop it to better than the PS3. You know, the console library is maybe a little bit weak, but the hardware really carries it to this part for me. Yeah. This is VTech. Why is this here? Who did this? I'm not ranking those. Wii U. Wii U, Wii U, Wii U. Wii U, Wii U. Wii U's tough. I had a Wii U. There's a lot of good games for it. But it's, you know, it was cut short, I think. And the games that came out for it, I think they did their best. But then you have games like Star Fox Zero, where it's like, what were they trying to do here? They were just innovating for the sake of innovation. I guess it comes back to that Shigeru Miyamoto, like, perspective that he's always had of, like, you know, if you like Star Fox 64, why not just go play Star Fox 64? Why would you want us to make a sequel? Why would you want a sequel to Star Fox, or not Star, why would you want a sequel to F-Zero? There's F-Zero GX in the GameCube, go play that. And that kind of thinking is what led to Star Fox Zero being a thing. It's like, Star Fox Zero is a game that could only be made on the Wii U. You know, maybe sometime down the line we'll see a re-release or like a reimagining of it for the Switch. But the gamepad controls for the cockpit view of Star Fox Zero, that was only doable on the Wii U. You couldn't even do that on the 3DS. Because, you know, part of the, I think, what was I watching? I was watching like a documentary about Star Fox Zero. And I think Miyamoto said, or somebody said, they wanted the TV screen to be a viewer experience where, you know, you're playing on the gamepad, you know, you're tilting and turning the gamepad as you're trying to shoot things. And the TV just shows like a cinematic view for all the people sitting in the room watching. I think the Wii U tablet did a lot of great things. I think it was really good for inventory management. Like with, what was it? Like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess had it as well. But, you know, you're just walking around as Link and you can equip things on the touchpad. That's really cool. That was like an actual innovation. That it was like, it changed the game a little bit, but it wasn't too intrusive to where you felt like you needed to play with it. You know, you could still play Wind Waker with the gamepad. You didn't need the touchscreen. You know, for games like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, the Wii U was a godsend. But for stuff like Star Fox Zero, where you were forced to use these awkward playstyles, it's kind of annoying. But the Wii U did have a lot of great games. You know, it did have Breath of the Wild, just like Nintendo Switch, so we'll put it above the Dreamcast. Sorry, Dreamcast. No, we'll put it above the Genesis. Why is that Genesis so high? Put it there. Nintendo Wii. This is a weird one. I feel like this has a lot of, like, clout for being for changing a lot of what it meant to, like, be a games console. Like, this doesn't look like a controller to a lot of people. Like, gosh, what was, like, the Atari 5200 and the television or whatever that is? You know, that was the last we saw of controllers like that. And they brought it back for the Wii. And it kind of introduced motion controls. Motion controls these days in games are underutilized a lot. And I think it's maybe partially because of the stigma it had around the Wii era. With like waggling. And just, you know, developers putting in random motion controls where it wasn't really necessary. But I think the Wii was a great step into like introducing the fact that, you know, moving your hands beyond your thumbs could be good for controlling a game. You know, with the Steam controller and even the Switch with the gyro aiming in Breath of the Wild and Splatoon. I don't think we would have had those if the Wii didn't exist, so Wii deserves a pretty high spot. I think there's fine. All right, Xbox. Let me reorder this a bit so it's chronological. All right, original Xbox. I don't have any experience with the original Xbox. And I think part of that is because it doesn't have a lot of games I'm interested in. You know, there's a lot of these consoles that are before my time, or just something I didn't play at the time. Like, I was playing GameCube when I was younger, but, you know, I eventually discovered PS2 games. I eventually discovered PS1 games, Super Nintendo games. You know, those consoles had the libraries to make me want to seek out, no, you know, not necessarily owning a console, but seek out games from the console and play them in, or just emulate them or whatever. But I guess the original Xbox, from what I understand, doesn't have very good emulation. But I just don't want to play the original Xbox. Like, I think the only original Xbox game I've played, other than like Halo on the Master Chief Collection, I played the original, or what was it? It was Panzer Dragoon Orta through Xbox One backwards compatibility. I think that's the only original Xbox game I've played. Yeah, that's... I know a lot of people hold the console very dear, but that's a low C tier for me. Xbox 360. Gosh, with the PlayStation 3, I feel like this has to be an A tier. But this generation of consoles, I forget what number it was, but that was a defining generation. You know, console gaming was finally becoming like super mainstream. Like Call of Duty was becoming really popular. It's kind of like a flashpoint where it started to become not so weird to play games. I guess maybe it was kind of a thing with the PlayStation 2, and it's super definitely a thing with Fortnite these days. But I feel like back then is where things started to change. And the 360 had a lot of cool stuff. I think for my modern gaming sensibilities, though, I think the PS3 was better. You know, I like my RPGs, I like my super long Japanese games. The 360 didn't have a lot of that. You know, it had Gears of War. Gosh, what else was there? I'm trying to think of 360 games. I can't really think of many. I just think of stuff like Gears of War. And I guess I was kind of into like Modern Warfare 2. But I was never super, super into like the shooter genre. I guess I was. I guess I was just specifically into Modern Warfare 2. I wasn't into Halo. Wasn't into Gears of War. I just really liked Modern Warfare 2. And I could have played that on PS3. So 360, you know, put 360 a little bit lower in GameCube. Xbox One. Man. That was rough. That was a rough time, you know? I got an Xbox One. You know, I got an Xbox One solely, only for the reason so I could play Rock Band 4 with my library of songs I bought for Rock Band 3 on the 360. That's the only reason I have an Xbox One and why it's sitting in my closet right now. Eventually, they ported every meaningful Xbox One game to PC. I think the single game that's on Xbox One that I wish was on PC, that isn't on PC, is Rare Replay. I think that's it. I remember thinking Sunset Overdrive, that was one I was like, oh, you know, Xbox One, it has Rare Replay and Sunset Overdrive. But Sunset Overdrive came to PC. Master Chief Collection did. Halo 5 is still, I guess, on Xbox One. I guess that's the other game. But even people don't really. Halo fans seem kind of split on Halo 5. But yeah, Xbox One, man, that's... Is that a D tier? You know what? I think it is. I think it is. Like, I have an Xbox One, but I don't think I'd ever plug it in. I think the only reason I would plug in my Xbox One is so I could play, what's it called? Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey. And those are backwards compatible games from the 360. That's the only temptation I've had to plug in my Xbox One, is for those two specific backwards compatible games. So yeah, I think the Xbox One as itself was rough time. And the Series X, you know, it's in a similar position. And I guess it's super because of the fact I talked about it with the PlayStation 4 and 5, where a lot of games are just cross-compatible with, like, well, what's a game that's come out recently? Forza Horizon, whatever the newest Forza Horizon game is. You know, I'm sure that came out on Series X and Xbox One. And it's like, it blurs the lines between what's a new generation and what's the old generation if the same game is playable on both consoles. So it's hard to rank, you know, one against another. And I guess Game Pass is like it's like a cool thing. But I don't know, Game Pass doesn't really... I guess it's useful to someone who, like, doesn't play games, who hasn't played games at all, and is just getting an Xbox and they want to see what gaming has to offer. It's a cool thing to, like, dip your toes in and see all the different things you can play. But as someone who has, like, a big Steam library, someone who has a lot of Switch games, PlayStation 4/5 games, you know, I don't really have a big incentive to get an Xbox One and get Game Pass. Or Series X. Yeah. I think the Series X is less interesting than the Xbox One. If only because the Xbox One has more games than the Series X. Xbox One has Rare Replay. Series X, I think all Series X games have come to PC, which is cool. You know, that's made my investment in PC as a gaming platform valuable. But it kind of devalues the Series X as like a console. At least for me, who would want to buy it. You know, it's good for people who have don't want to get into PC gaming. I guess that's a good enough purpose for it, but it's not good for me. So that's that. How do we feel about this? In S tier, we have Super Nintendo, PlayStation 2, PlayStation. Am I happy with that? I think I am. Is there any other reordering I want to do? Feels weird having the Game Boy up this high. I don't know. Do I like Switch games more than Game Boy games? I feel like I like the Switch more than the Game Boy Advance as a platform. Alright, well, I think I'm mostly happy with everything else. And yeah, this is supposed to be the Nintendo Entertainment System. That's so weird that this is a video game console tier list, and there's no Nintendo Entertainment System. Unless I'm missing like this is not a Nintendo. This isn't a Nintendo. I'm not stupid, am I? No. That's a Sega Genesis. Mega Drive, whatever. Yeah. Alright, so that's that. We'll call it there, and, you know, as always, if you got a suggestion for a future video or future tier list, future topic, leave in the comments. If you leave a comment if you have any strong disagreements with me here about any of my placements. I'm curious if you feel like I did any one console really dirty. If you're a super big Dreamcast fan, let me know. Let me know that I'm wrong. I want to hear it. All right. See you next time.